What a headshot! What a head!
How's it, guys? This is Dayvy, FPL, and welcome back to the Fantasy Premier League video here on my channel. Now in this video, I'm going to bring you guys a mid-season review of the prior half of the current FPL season. Just because of the uncertainty and everything that's been going around with Game Week 22, is it going to be a double game week? Is it not? I mean, just today we got the Liverpool news that their first Carabao Cup game against Arsenal was going to be postponed due to an outbreak at the training ground, and therefore they won't have a double game week 22. So in terms of content for the upcoming game week, a little bit useless at the current moment to do it just because of all the uncertainty. So I thought it was the perfect time to do a little bit of a mid-season review with the 2-week break between game week 21 and game week 22. So in terms of a mid-season review, what does that entail? Well, I've brought back a video that I did create in the preseason that I thought you guys massively enjoyed, and also that was quite informative. So I've brought that video back with the plots in terms of price versus points and all that good stuff, and I will bring you guys the defensive, including defenders and goalkeepers, midfielders and forward comparison of all the current FPL options in the game. So this video did require quite a lot of work, so I do always appreciate you guys' support, and also drop it in the comments down below any feedback for upcoming videos, and tell me if you do enjoy this type of video. Also, I know that I do talk quite quickly. Maybe you didn't grasp some concepts, so if you guys don't understand something or maybe want stats of a specific player, drop it in the comments down below and I'll try to reply with an explanation or the information that you guys did ask for. But having said all that, hopefully you guys do enjoy this video. Sit back, relax, and let's get straight into it. So just to give you guys some context and some background before I do show these graphs or plots, I wanted to just take you through what you guys will be seeing and how I created them. So first of all, there's a couple of plots that I managed to create. The first one's going to be a simple price versus points comparison, basically taking the price and comparing the points of every single option in goalkeepers, defenders, midfielders, and that forward department. And then I also did add a linear regression line. Now that linear regression line is basically the average gradient of all the points in my kind of selection. And that sample selection was taken from players that have scored 40 points or more. But now you guys might be asking, why 40 points? Well, what I kind of saw is that most teams have played an average of 20 games. So theoretically, with appearance points, players that have started every single game should have 40 points to their name. Now obviously this does exclude some options that might have joined late on, might only be in the starting 11 recently, but it was just quite hard to take those cases on a case-by-case basis, and therefore I decided for an overall cutoff of 40 points. What that linear regression line will tell you is it's basically the value or points per million, and that's exactly what the last couple graphs are going to be. First of all, it's going to be a value graph because it's a little bit hard to see the gradient of a point on a kind of XY plot. So created that value graph, but also I created a value per 90 minutes played, which basically takes the points per 90 minutes that the players have gotten, as I think it's also a good indication to maybe select some options that have joined late, or maybe have only started playing in the starting 11 recently. So just to maybe conclude this point, you guys will be seeing 3 plots. The first one, price versus points. The second one, value per million. And finally, the value per million per 90 minutes played of the respective FPL options. So now that we have gotten the plots out the way, obviously there will be some limitations here. The first limitation, the most obvious one, is that we're assuming that every player has played the same amount of minutes for the price versus points plots. So the per 90 minutes value will kind of nullify this a little bit more, but in terms of the overall plots, we'll be assuming that every player has played the same amount of minutes, and this is obviously not true. Just take, for example, a Cristiano Ronaldo. He missed the opening 4 or 3 game weeks for Man United after signing quite late for them in the transfer window, and therefore he basically missed 3 full games. Now when we do compare him to a player that has played the full 20, 21, 18, 90, whatever games they have played, that's a little bit unfair, but I think we have to take that on an individual basis, and that'll obviously change depending on which player you're looking at. Another limitation is also in terms of the minutes played, is that some players have had postponed fixtures. I think the minimum amount of games is 18 that a respective side has played, with the Man City and Chelsea playing the maximum of 21 if memory does serve me right. So that will therefore be another assumption or limitation that we could have. But as I said, case by case basis, and what I would do if you really want to see how a player has performed, take them on an individual basis and look at their stats that way. There are a few other limitations that we will go through as we go along, and I'll hopefully address them in each kind of position that we see to help you guys get the most information out as possible. So now going on to the first graph here, and we're going to be going from goalkeepers to defenders to midfielders, and the final one is going to be the forwards. So the graph you see in front of you is going to be the price per million of the goalkeepers. Probably the most boring selection here. I think goalkeepers are severely underrated, and you guys will see that as we look at the comparison between value of the respective positions. But in terms of the goalkeepers here, you can see that nice red linear regression line. This is taken over the sample. This is basically going to be the average that was created for all the goalkeepers in my sample. So if they're above that line, the distance from that line to the point will be the amount of kind of value they've presented. And if they are below the line, they are underperforming at the current moment compared to their other options. Now, in terms of the options, I have decided to do a linear regression line for each position, just that we are comparing them against the respective position, because at the end of the day, you have to select a goalkeeper. You need a starting goalkeeper, 2 goalkeepers sometimes. But later in the video, I will be addressing this point of comparing goalkeepers to other positions. So right off the bat, you guys will see there's a massive distance between 2 specific keepers, and that's going to be Saar and Ramsdale. So massive kind of value being presented by these 2 options, and you guys will get a graphical representation of that in the next talking point when you do look at their value per million. Other options that are quite notable is that we are seeing some good performances from Edison, Lloris, De Gea, Fabianski, and then finally the cheap goalkeepers, Guaita and Sanchez. So Sanchez is a personal favorite from mine. I think at 4.5, now 4.6 or 7, great value for money on there. And if you guys do remember the preseason kind of video, that was the same video that you guys are seeing right now, you would have seen that Sanchez was my cheap goalkeeper of choice. But there are some mid-range options that are presenting some good value here. Lloris with those upcoming double game weeks. De Gea, maybe if Man United were better defensively, he would be higher. I definitely think so. But the fact of the matter is that he still is great for save points and therefore can still provide some good value for your money. Unfortunately, Martinez, the Aston Villa goalkeeper, is not having the same season as last season, but that might change in the next half that we will be seeing. But then finally, the worst value for money goalkeeper, probably going to be Nick Pope there for Burnley. A massive distance, or a kind of negative distance between the linear regression line and himself, which just shows you how Burnley have been defending so badly and how this season they haven't been the kind of defensive giants that they've been in previous seasons. The rest of the goalkeepers, I'm not going to focus on them too much because their ownerships are quite low, but you guys can just pause the video at any time and look at the stats for yourself. So now going on to the value, just remember that this is not the value per 90 minutes played. This is simply just kind of the points scored divided by the price they are at. That's also something that I forgot to tell you. This is going to be the price that they currently are. I just think that I could have taken the price they were at the start of the season. But if you guys are looking to bring these options in, you won't pay that price. You'll pay their current price. And therefore, if they're good value now, they were even better value back then. So in terms of the straight value here, you can see that the Wolves and the Arsenal goalkeepers Saar and Ramsdale are kind of miles ahead of the rest, and I definitely would recommend looking at these options if you guys do want to bring a goalkeeper in for the next half of the season. You can see at the bottom of the graph there, bottom left, Pope yet again showing why he's such bad value for money, and I do think FPL kind of overpriced him this Premier League season. Goalkeepers are kind of an interesting position because you only generally need one of them and then a cheapie, so I do think Ramsdale and Saar are looking like great value, but also you have someone like a Lloris or a Sanchez, maybe a Sanchez if you want to go cheaper, but I definitely think the Arsenal and the Wolves defense looks quite solid heading up in the next half of the season. But now going on to the value per 90 minutes played, and you guys will see here that Ramsdale and Saar have switched places, and the reason for this is that Ramsdale actually missed the opening 2 games of the current Premier League season, but I don't really mind about that because I think they were against some tougher opposition, and therefore I don't think too many points would have come his way anyways. So Ramsdale, Saar still showing that these are the 2 goalkeepers to focus on, and I would recommend getting one of these if you guys are going to be wildcarding early on into the second half. Another interesting point here is that Meslier and Pope are currently the worst goalkeepers in terms of value per 90 minutes. I have seen some people with Meslier, so my recommendation would be, if you guys still do own him, it might be time to ship him out. But if you guys do want to kind of go cheap on your goalkeeper, I think Sanchez is currently leading the way, only slightly over McCarthy, but I still do trust the Brighton defense slightly more than the Southampton one, and therefore if you guys want to go cheap, Sanchez is a great option to look at. So now that we kind of covered the goalkeepers, I'm going to focus on the defender. So slightly more of an interesting position. You'll see at the end of the video, probably the most important position to focus on, as yet again this season we have some very premium defenders scoring loads of points, but then also some cheap options that might be going slightly under the radar. So first of all, your eyes kind of drawn to the top half. You've got Alexander-Arnold and Cancelo both overperforming the expected points and therefore still providing good value for money, even Trent at that expensive price point. Van Dijk, Robertson aren't keeping up with their colleague there, underperforming by quite a large margin, especially Robertson, and I do think maybe that price was slightly too expensive for the other Liverpool fullback. But Diaz kind of accompanying Cancelo, not by the greatest margin, but still showing that he is good value for money, accompanying Rudiger and James at that slot. As we kind of go down the list, we have yet another Man City defender. We got Laporte, and then we also have some Wolves assets, kind of the introduction of these Wolves options. Cody and Saiss providing great value for money. The only hindrance is that Saiss has traveled to AFCON, but when he does come back and you guys are looking for a defender, I would really recommend maybe looking at the Wolves centre back. Other notable options here, we have a Regulon, we have a Tierney. Those look like great value for money. And then as you kind of go down the list, you're provided with some cheap options that might not be the best and might be great for your bench instead. One notable kind of exception here is the Chelsea defense. Alonso, Aspie, and Ben Chilwell all kind of underperforming, but you guys will see in the next talking points that the Chelsea defenders are actually pretty good value when they do play. One surprise for me on this list was going to be Emerson Royale. I really did think that he had a great FPL season, at least kind of an average one, but this graph kind of shows you that he is severely underperforming, and therefore if you guys are looking for a Spurs defender, I would really recommend Regulon over the Brazilian. But now going on to our value, not value per 90 minutes played, please remember that. This graph shows you the points per million that these defenders have offered throughout the first half of the season. So right at the top there, João Cancelo from Man City, a great option this season, has provided massive points, is kind of having a record-breaking season for himself and his prior seasons. Because basically what's happened is that you've had this really strong Man City defense, so getting clean sheets, but then you've had the attacking threat of Cancelo, which has reached new heights this season, providing those goals and assists to boot, and therefore that makes him the best value for money defender in the game currently. Now, I don't really think Man City will regress. I don't think the defensive stats will get worse. I think that João Cancelo will only kind of move on, and therefore I would recommend, if you guys don't have him in your team, which you probably do, I would definitely bring him in, even if you guys are going to wildcard quite early. But now it kind of goes on to one of the most important talking points out of this video, and that's going to be how undervalued or underrated the Wolves defense is currently. We've got Cody, we've got Kilman, and Saiss all in the top 5 defenders in terms of value per million. Absolutely sensational there, just shows you how strong that Wolves defense has actually been this season, and that's why if you guys are on the look for a cheap defender, I can't stress how good that Wolves defense has actually been. Now, from an attacking point of view, they haven't been that strong, but that just makes it even better from a defensive point of view, because those bonus points are going to come to the defense if they do manage to keep a clean sheet. Now we move on to the more expensive defenders, Alexander-Arnold, which shows you, even though he is quite expensive, how great the value actually has been this first half, and I do expect him to carry on that form, as Liverpool should shore up defensively, haven't been that great in terms of the clean sheets, but the attacking threat is always there from Trent Alexander-Arnold. Diaz coming in as a second option for Man City, understandable, as he is more of a nailed option in that starting 11. We then have Ben White, great value for money. Dyer, a surprise here from that Spurs lineup. Laporte, Rudiger, Tierney, and James follow up, which is probably quite expected. What's quite interesting for me here is that we have definitely seen some sides that are better defensively than other sides. Just look at that. Man City, Wolves, Liverpool, Arsenal, Spurs, and then finally Chelsea, all kind of in that top half. And basically all the options that you guys see there are from those selected teams. As we go down the list, the value per million kind of deteriorates. We have Christensen at the bottom there with some injuries. I understand that. He hasn't really played that much. There has been some rotation in that Chelsea defense. But then also have Emerson Royale yet again showing that he might not be the best option kind of going forward. Alonso was also kind of a surprise for me in that middle of the slot, but I can understand that because he kind of fell out of favor in that starting 11 and hasn't really played that many minutes, to be honest. But now kind of going on to the next selection was going to be the value per 90 minutes played, and the surprising thing for me here was how high the Chelsea fullbacks are regarded. We have James and Chilwell right at the top there, kind of devastates everyone else in terms of value per 90 minutes, and unfortunately because of the injury he has sustained over the prior weeks, he's not going to be able to have that record-breaking season that I do think he could have had with a full season played. So Chilwell, James, great options going forward if they can stay injury-free. We then have Sanchez from Spurs, a player that recently has popped up in a few people's teams and even some kind of differential thoughts. And I think if he can continue playing at the current rate, under Conte has proved to be a very defensively strong manager. I think that Sanchez, with that attacking threat we saw against Watford, scoring off that Human-Son free kick, I think that Sanchez could be a really nice entry into that Conte defense. Chalobah, yet another Chelsea defender here, which shows you how good that Chelsea defense has actually been. But unfortunately with those centre-backs, there is occasional rotation there under Tuchel, and therefore we can't trust Chalobah unless he provides a nice starting 11 option. Aït-Nouri, a player that was mentioned at the start of this season, under the new Wolves management, has provided some points, but there is some speculation about some rotation with the Marcel. We then have some introductions of some Arsenal and Spurs assets with Tierney, Tomiyasu, and Reguilon. Marcel, another option there, kind of accompanying Aït-Nouri. There just shows you when they do play, they do provide good value, and they do play the same position. So quite interesting there that we have both those selections within the top half. We then unfortunately get quite a large clump of players there, providing the kind of 5 to all the way to the 10 kind of mark. These players are options that probably play quite a few minutes, but unfortunately the clean sheets haven't come about, which is probably the majority of players at the end of the day. So I generally wouldn't really focus on this plot, maybe uncovering some differentials that you guys can go for, but I think the previous plot of the value or kind of points per million scored is far more useful for the defenders because most of them are pretty nailed. But now going on to probably the department that everyone has been waiting for. It's going to be the midfield department. And what I want you guys to do on this plot is don't focus on the left or the kind of lower points per scored. I want you to focus on the right-hand side or the more premium assets. And the reason for that is in the next plot, I will be deleting these more expensive options just because it's a little bit crowded in that left-hand side and I want to give some more clarity on those options. So let's focus on the right-hand side here. And what's more to say about Mo Salah that hasn't been said? On track for an absolutely record-breaking season, and even though he does come in about that 12.8, 12.9 mark, he still is providing massive value for money. So now what you guys are thinking, even though he does travel to AFCON, as soon as he gets back, I'll be bringing him straight back into my side. I might even bench him because I think he's just such a good option to have when he does come back. The only other expensive midfielder that has been overperforming is going to be Heung-min Son. Sadio Mane, Sterling, Fernandes and De Bruyne all come in under that linear regression line, but with the Man City assets, it's a little bit more understandable. So Kevin De Bruyne has been out injured for most games this season, whereas Raheem Sterling is a rotation risk, and unfortunately with these Man City assets, that's generally the case that they kind of have great value per million, but unfortunately they don't start that many games, and therefore in terms of the overall picture, don't look great value for money. But Bruno Fernandes is definitely the player that I would recommend having the fraud badge because this season, I don't really know what's happened, if it's been Man United as a whole or Fernandes as a whole, but definitely hasn't had the same season as price season, and that's why he's underperforming quite a bit because of that more expensive price. Sadio Mane is another one that's a little bit closer than Bruno Fernandes, but I do think FPL got the price wrong, so I think an 11.5 and 11 price tag would have been a lot better value for money. But these expensive assets, I mean, it's Mo Salah, he's the king, we're going to be looking at him. But now let's go on for some more cheaper options that might provide better value for money. So as I mentioned earlier on, I'm deleting the more expensive players. All those Heung-min Sons, Mo Salahs, Bruno Fernandes are deleted. And we'll be focusing on the 4 to 9 million mark. So the first option I want to talk about is bottom right there. Sancho from United, unfortunately not really performing that well. You might be saying that this is because he hasn't started that many games, but you guys will see in terms of the value per 90 played, also underperforming, and therefore unfortunately coming back to English football has been quite a rough ride for Sancho. It's been a better ride for some options like a Jota, a Bernardo, a Mount, a Bowen. These options have provided great value for money. Mount is one that has gone slightly under the radar, and if you guys do want to look at a mid-price midfielder, I would probably look at him because that Chelsea side will continue to bounce back, I do believe, and Mount should be getting amongst the goals and assists on that front. But Bernardo Silva, a kind of breakout season for the Man City midfielder, the Portuguese international. He's accompanied by his compatriot Jota there, but Bernardo has had a great season, might be overperforming slightly. I know you stats guys and XG merchants are probably shouting at the monitor right now. Has regressed from kind of that peak over these prior game weeks, but if you guys did own Bernardo Silva over that good run of form, I think you guys will be absolutely celebrating and probably are quite high in the ranks. Bouncing off Bernardo there, I'm going to focus on the Man City other midfielders. Gundogan, Foden and Mahrez all coming under that linear regression line, which shows that they've been slightly underperforming. But with those Man City options, as I mentioned, with the De Bruyne, Sterling, their rotation is quite heavy and therefore they usually do underperform. But if you guys do buy them when they're starting the majority of games, great value for money, and their value per 90 is pretty strong, to be honest. We're then going to move on to kind of the middle upper department. We've got some great options here. A Bowen, Saka, Gallagher, Benrahma. Benrahma, if you guys remember at the start of the season, had great form. Has kind of dipped recently, but still great value for money at that price point. The Arsenal options, Smith Rowe and Saka, look good value. A Gallagher, another player. A Chelsea loanee that's had a strong season. Rafinha kind of ticking along nicely. Maddison, another one. If you guys want to look at a Leicester option with those fixtures coming up, Maddison's your man. And then a nice casual pick there with Jorginho. Just shows you if you guys want to go for a more casual option. He is on penalties, and those penalties have been quite strong for Chelsea, and he's providing good value if you guys did bring him in. Now, kind of going down the list, you guys will see some other options. I'm not going to focus on them too much. You guys can pause the video right now. Look for an option that you guys do own. But I finally want to touch on those 4.5 options because when you guys are wild carding, looking at a free hit, looking at maybe some free transfers, and you want to bring in a cheap option, unfortunately with those 4.5s, there's not too much between them. Allen, Ramsey, Amada, and Douglas Luiz all providing similar kind of points returns, and therefore I would kind of just go with the one you think has the highest potential going to the next half of the season. But now going on to our value played, not value per 90 minutes played. And you guys can see it's a similar occurrence here. We've got Benrahma, Gallagher, Bowen, Smith Rowe and Saka all leading the way in a little bit of a peloton. So when I look at these options, one thing kind of strikes out to me, and it's youth. Smith Rowe, Bowen, Saka and Gallagher all relatively young, and therefore I think FPL underprices these options because they are young, and therefore if they have a good season, they're going to be overperforming that price point. So I think these options, if you guys don't own them, I think just choose the better fixtures. Whoever has the better fixtures, go for them. Except for maybe a Benrahma, where a Bowen or an Antonio might be a more favorable option. We then go on to our next clump, which is going to be Salah and Bernardo. Really impressed that Salah, even though he comes in so expensive, is still managing to maintain a kind of top 6 slot in that value per million race. Bernardo also had a great season, underpriced because he hasn't had those stats in the prior seasons, so you can understand that price point. Jorginho, another one, casual pick yet again that you guys could maybe be looking at. But then we come up with some interesting picks. Odegaard and Henderson. So Henderson, the Liverpool midfielder, is kind of profiting from a more advanced role in that midfield now that Fabinho is the guaranteed CDM, and he showed you there that from a Liverpool point of view, he's providing some good value for money if you guys want to go for the midfielder. Odegaard, another one that has been recently performing quite well, and therefore from an Arsenal point of view, a great options from that midfield department. Odegaard, Smith Rowe and Saka all showing why they're such good options, and Arsenal seem to be having quite a good season, especially from a value per million point of view. We then kind of go down the list with some very popular options, but I'm going to focus more on the bottom side where we have Sancho, De Bruyne, Fernandes and Havertz. So Havertz and Grealish have not had great seasons. I think if you guys were here at the start of this season would have heard me probably say Havertz is my standout pick for this season, going to have a great season. Most people in the FPL community thought so as well, but that really hasn't been the case. Don't really know if it's a formation thing, maybe it's a form thing, maybe under Tuchel hasn't really been playing his favorable spot, but his performances this season definitely haven't been backing up that more expensive price point. De Bruyne, we've mentioned, hasn't really played that many minutes. Sancho and Fernandes as well, so their value per million isn't that strong. But as I've mentioned, the F in Fernandes stands for fraud because this season he definitely has not been on form. But kind of now going on to the value per 90 minutes played, and you guys will see yet again some interesting options here. And usually what happens is you have a substitute option that generally scores off the bench. I'm looking at a Smith Rowe here, although he started the season with quite good stats. But a McAllister from Brighton just shows you that when he is on the pitch, scores quite a few points, and he leads that mark by quite a high margin. Lanzini, another one here in that West Ham starting 11 that might not be the most guaranteed option, but when he does play, scores points, similar to kind of a Martinelli, who's had better form over these past game weeks recently. Cornet from Burnley, I mean, how does Burnley have such a good option? I don't really know, but he is a great option going forward as long as he does stay injury free, as he is playing out of position as a midfielder in that forward department for Burnley, and therefore if he manages to stay injury free, as I mentioned, should provide some good value for your money. Going down the list, Mahrez there showing that when he does play, provides some good points returns. At the bottom of the list, yet again, Fernandes showing why he's not good value for money per 90 minutes played, as well as Sadio Mane, who went on quite a long streak of not scoring in the Prem. It does get kind of cluttered there, I do apologize, and that's why I said if you guys want a specific option, drop it in the comments down below and I'll tell you where they are located. But as I mentioned earlier on, this value per 90 minutes played, please use it quite well because there's a lot of options here that play every single minute. Therefore, they're guaranteed to get more points, but playing every game might not have the highest points returns. But now kind of going on to the final category of positions, it's going to be the forward department. And spoiler alert here, guys, the forwards this season have been absolutely rubbish. So you guys can see the linear regression line is almost a straight line on the x-axis, and because of this, what I wanted to show you guys is the difference using one of the other positions linear regression lines actually makes. So right now you guys can see Vardy, Ronaldo, they actually look like they're overperforming their kind of price points and actually look like quite good value for money. But now when we switch it to the midfielder regression line, which takes the average gradient of all the midfielder sample selections, you guys will see that Ronaldo and Vardy are now underperforming their stats. And this just kind of shows you that there's not many options in that forward department that are overperforming, but when they do, they are great value for money. I'm looking at an Antonio and a Dennis. Antonio getting off to a very hot start this Premier League season, had dipped off towards the middle point, but hopefully will rebound into this next half of the season because at his price point, he still looks like good value. But there's only one option to go for in that forward department, and that's going to be Dennis from Watford. A great season, almost a record-breaking season for Watford, I do believe, and he provides an almost insane amount of value that rivals some other positions. And then there are only a select few that are overperforming the midfielder selection, and that's going to be Gucci, Mapai, Edouard, King, and Pukki. So when I mentioned that the forward department is looking quite bad this season, I wasn't overestimating it. I don't really know a premium option that you guys should be looking at with the stats that I've just shown you. I mean, just go look at a Lukaku and a Kane. I mean, Lukaku coming off those harsh words to the Chelsea fans and the Chelsea faithful. So I don't really know how many minutes he's going to be getting in the upcoming game weeks. But Harry Kane as well, only 3 goals this season, just shows you how different he's been to the prior season, which was the reason he was priced at such a high price point. Firmino yet again showing you, although he has been injured for quite a few game weeks, why FPL continues to price him at such a ridiculous price point, and I do think hopefully next season they'll come to their senses and price him slightly cheaper. But now going to our value for the forward department, and as I mentioned, Dennis, there's only one winner in the forward department, and that's going to be the Watford striker. Great value for money there, rivaling other positions as I did mention, and then there's a massive gap between him and Antonio. The rest of the options here is showing you that there's not a great selection, and if you want to go for a forward, it's probably going to be quite a cheap one, with Antonio, Gucci, King, Mupai, Pukki, Edouard, and finally Broja heading up the next slots. No surprise there that Lukaku and Kane are the worst value per million in the forward departments, and it's really hard to justify getting these options when you've looked at these graphs. But finally, going on the value per 90 minutes played, and you might be surprised to see here that there has been a switch up in that front line. And Broja is going to be the best value per 90 minutes played, which might be a little bit surprising, but to be honest, as a player that has looked at Broja over these past couple game weeks, that's understandable because he doesn't start every game, but when he does, he gets you FPL points. So if Broja manages to stay injury-free, I think he's definitely an option I would look at alongside Dennis and Antonio. Dennis, the next selection here, no surprise there, but unfortunately, because he's so nailed in that Watford lineup, which is a good thing from an FPL point of view, it does bring down his value per 90 minutes played slightly. Iheanacho might be a surprising option here from that Leicester lineup. I know with Jamie Vardy up front, they've newly signed Daka. I mean, there might be some rotation there, but when Iheanacho does start, he does get you FPL points. And then surprisingly, to be honest, is going to be Roberto Firmino from Liverpool. We've kind of dragged him here a little bit, dragged FPL for pricing him so expensive. But look at this, when he does play, he gets you some points, and therefore he might still be a great option with Sadio Mane and Mo Salah off at AFCON. Edouard, a new signing for Crystal Palace, also providing some good value. And Hwang, because he's so cheap, when he does start, he provides some good value per 90 minutes played. Kane, though, yet again showing that he has played every single minute, has got basically no points, and therefore he's the worst option to get if you're looking at value per 90 minutes played. But now finally, to wrap up this video, what I wanted to do is give you some value comparisons between the previous talking points or the previous positions. So I compared the goalkeepers, defenders, midfielders, and forward departments. So on the right-hand graph, that's the one I'm going to talk about firstly. I took the top 3 value players from each selection and plotted them on this graph. Now what you might be seeing is that there's certain players that are actually not on this graph, and therefore that's because they're hidden behind other points, because I think in terms of the goalkeepers and the defenders, they both hold the top spot at about 7.5. So from this graph, you can definitely see that the worst option or the worst positions to get are going to be those forwards. The only selection was Dennis, who rivaled those midfielders, and the third highest value goalkeeper. So if you're not looking at Dennis, there's not too many other options to get, to be honest. But what's interesting to see here is yet again, the defense and the goalkeepers are showing how valuable they actually can be at those price points. And therefore, maybe a 5 at the back or a big at the back formation isn't the worst strategy to kind of get. But what happens on the right-hand graph correlates to the left-hand graph, because on the left-hand side, what I did was I took the linear regression line formula, y equals mx plus c, and I plotted it for each position and then color coordinated it with the right-hand side. And what you guys can see is the highest gradient is going to be the defenders, which shows you that they provide the best value for money in that sample that I selected of 40 points and above. But then goalkeepers come in with a very similar gradient there, which does show you that those goalkeepers are performing quite well, and maybe getting a more expensive goalkeeper might not be the worst strategy in the world. Midfielders then provide an average value compared to the goalkeepers and defenders, but definitely the worst options to get at the current moment are going to be those forwards with almost a parallel to the x-axis gradient. For me, it's just so insane how the forwards this season have been so bad, but hopefully in the next half, we might see a switch up, and then at the end of season review, that gradient might increase slightly. But this is basically wrap the video, guys. Hopefully you did enjoy it. Please don't forget to like if you did and subscribe if you're not subscribed yet. As I mentioned, this video took quite a lot of effort to bring, so I do always appreciate you guys' support and feedback in the comments down below. But otherwise, I'll be checking you guys next week for some more up-to-date double game week 22, at least hopefully a double game week with all the usual videos. And if you guys have any selections for upcoming videos, you can also drop those down below. But I've been signing off. It's been Dayvy FPL, and I'm out. Cheers. Bye.